You've just time-slipped onto a 65-man wooden ship for 3 filthy weeks, and suddenly your modern bathroom is looking like a 5-star spa with a trust fund. No toilet, no drain, no soap, no privacy, just 65 bodies, wet wool, stale breath, and the kind of smell that could gaslight a corpse into getting up and leaving. Welcome to Medieval Manuscript. Now here's the wild part. The Vikings did this and somehow did not all instantly die like medieval Europe's worst group chat. You, meanwhile, would last about 10 minutes before filing a complaint with the universe. 3 weeks on a wooden ship means sleeping shoulder to shoulder, eating from shared bowls, and doing your business wherever the crew decided wherever was acceptable that day. The deck gets slick, the air gets rank, your skin gets grimy, your patience gets cooked. And yet, these people kept sailing, raiding, trading, and surviving in conditions that would make a modern Karen demand a refund from history itself. Here's the thing. Cramped living spaces are not just gross, they're a health hazard. When people are packed together with no sanitation, germs spread fast. According to public health basics, close contact, poor ventilation, and contaminated surfaces are the perfect recipe for stomach bugs, skin infections, and respiratory illness. On a ship like this, one sick person could turn the whole crew into a coughing, vomiting disaster zone. Your body is basically a castle, and this setup is a siege. What kept them going? Not magic, not Viking toughness nonsense. It was a brutal mix of adaptation, routine, and survival math. They used the sea like a highway, not a vacation. They knew how to ration food, manage water, and keep the ship moving. They also lived in a world where discomfort was normal and infection was a constant threat, so people learned to tolerate misery the way modern people tolerate bad Wi-Fi. Think of it like this. Your immune system is a bouncer at a nightclub. In a clean, spacious environment, it can keep trouble out. On a 65-man ship with no soap and no drain, the bouncer is getting shoved, bribed, and gaslit from every direction. Sweat, waste, and shared surfaces all raise the odds of illness. That's why sanitation matters so much today, and why medieval life was basically a long argument with bacteria. And the Vikings? They were not living in luxury. They were surviving in a floating coffin with ambition. So the real question is not whether the ship was disgusting. Obviously it was. The real question is this. Why didn't the coffin become a plague pit? A lot. Ahmad ibn Fadlan, writing in the 10th century, described the Rus as washing their faces and heads every morning in a basin of water, combing their hair, and keeping themselves surprisingly tidy by the standards of the stereotype. John of Wallingford, a 13th century English chronicler, also gives us a world where cleanliness was not some rare miracle. People bathed, shaved, combed, and tried to keep their bodies presentable because dirt was not just ugly. It was embarrassing. The body was not a trash can. Daily washing of the hands, face, and sometimes the whole body was common enough to show up in texts, household advice, and monastic routines. Soap existed. Not luxury unicorn soap, but real soap made from fat and ash. And here's the part that ruins the medieval people never bathed meme. Combing mattered. Hair was checked for lice. Beards were trimmed. Linen undergarments were worn because linen could be washed more easily than wool, which is basically medieval hygiene logic in one sentence. Keep the nasty layer close to the skin, then strip and clean it. Archaeology backs this up. Excavations across medieval sites keep turning up combs, wash basins, razors, tweezers, and grooming tools like people were trying, against all odds, to remain human. Weak beer, sour milk, and the medieval fridge problem. Weak beer was often safer than water in places where water sources could be contaminated. The alcohol content was often low, and the process helped reduce some risks from dirty water. Sour milk, yogurt, cheese, and other fermented foods did similar work. Medieval people did not have your refrigerator humming in the corner like a loyal metal servant. They had smoke, salt, drying, pickling, and souring. If food started to turn, they did not always throw it away in a panic like a modern Karen demanding a refund from the universe. They processed it, preserved it, and prayed it did not fight back. This matters because foodborne illness was a constant threat. Spoiled food can carry bacteria and toxins that cause vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, and worse. In a world without 4 fluids and antibiotics, a bad stomach bug could become a death sentence fast. So yes, medieval diets could be grim. But grim is not the same as stupid. A lot of these habits were survival science before anyone had the vocabulary for it. Shame as a public health tool. Medieval society loved shame. Loved it. If you smelled bad, looked unkempt, or behaved like a slob, people noticed. And that social pressure did something modern public health campaigns still try to do. It pushed people toward hygiene. Not because they understood germ theory the way we do now, but because they understood consequences. Dirty people got sick. Dirty households got infested. Dirty habits made everyone miserable. That is why grooming, laundering, and bathing were not just vanity. They were discipline. They were status. They were survival. A clean face and combed hair said you were not a complete disaster. A washed body said you had access to water, time, and enough self-control not to become a walking biohazard. Medieval people absolutely had filth. They also had routines designed to fight it. So when you hear that medieval Europe was one giant sewer, that's only half the story. The Crusader ship, floating petri dish. A Crusader vessel was not a romantic wooden cathedral of holy adventure. It was a cramped, moving infection chamber. Men slept shoulder to shoulder in the hold, often with little separation from food stores, animals, and waste. Shared barrels meant shared contamination. One sick body could turn the whole deck into a rolling outbreak, because diarrhea does not respect rank, prayer, or your heroic little cross stitched onto a tunic. And the air? Brutal. Below deck, ventilation was weak. Smoke and sweat hung in the timber like a curse, and every cough bounced around the hull. Add seasickness, dehydration, and contaminated water, and you get the medieval version of a group chat nobody can leave. Dysentery was especially vicious because it strips the body fast. Severe diarrhea can cause dehydration, weakness, confusion, and death if fluids are not replaced. According to modern public health guidance, that kind of fluid loss can become dangerous in hours, not days. So yes, the Crusader ship was holy in the same way a latrine is private. The Viking longship, less comfort, more survival. Now compare that to a Viking longship, which was still miserable, but in a very different way. Vikings did not sail in luxury. They were cold, wet, exposed, and one bad wave away from regretting every life choice. But their ships were built for movement, not for trapping bodies in a stink box. Longships were open, fast, and designed to keep air moving. Waste could be managed overboard more easily than in a sealed hold. At harbor, crews could reset, empty, clean, and reorganize instead of marinating in their own filth for weeks. That matters more than it sounds. When you keep bodies moving and air circulating, you reduce the kind of stagnant, enclosed conditions that let illness spread like gossip at a wedding. It was not sanitary by modern standards. Let's not gaslight history into a spa brochure. But compared with a Crusader transport packed below deck, the longship gave you something priceless: space, wind, and a fighting chance not to inhale your neighbor's intestinal disaster. The body count problem. This is where the medieval travel fantasy gets wrecked. On a Crusader ship, the danger was not just battle. It was the voyage itself. Crowding, poor ventilation, contaminated water, and shared waste created ideal conditions for gastrointestinal disease. Once dysentery hit, the weak went first. Children, the elderly, and already malnourished men were especially vulnerable. In a world without four fluids, antibiotics, or modern sanitation, a bad outbreak could hollow out a crew before it ever saw enemy steel. Viking crews had their own risks, of course. Exposure, storms, injury, and hunger could still kill you. But their ship design did not force everyone into one floating fever dream of bad air and shared barrels. The difference is simple. One system trapped sickness, the other let the wind do some of the work. Important reality check. Medieval people did not understand germs the way we do now, but they absolutely understood patterns. If a place smelled foul, felt cramped, and made people sick, that was not character. That was danger. And that brings us to the part Europe really did not want to think about. But the real horror is what Europe believed about bathing. Edward III did not sit around twirling a mustache and admiring sewage. In 1349, as plague pressure mounted, London authorities pushed for street cleaning and better public order, because even medieval rulers could smell the problem. Open sewers ran along roads like liquid threats. Chamber pots were dumped into alleys, sometimes with a warning shout if you were lucky and a splash if you were not. Wells could be contaminated by runoff, and livestock wandered through town like they owned the lease. Medieval officials did understand that foul smells and dirty water were dangerous. They were not completely gaslighting themselves, but their tools were weak, their enforcement patchy, and their infrastructure was basically hope for the best. Many physicians believed that hot water opened the pores and made the body vulnerable to bad air and disease. That belief did not come from nowhere. Medieval medicine was shaped by humoral theory, which treated the body like a balancing act of fluids and qualities. If you were too hot, too wet, too cold, too dry, or too full of the wrong stuff, you were out of harmony. So bathing could be seen as risky, especially if followed by exposure to cold air. But here is the brutal irony. While some doctors feared water, cities were drowning in contamination. The real enemy was not a clean wash. It was the cesspit outside your door, the well downhill from the latrine, and the butcher's runoff soaking into the street. Medieval people were trying to avoid invisible danger while standing ankle-deep in visible danger. If you want a perfect medieval health trap, start with water. Wells were supposed to be life. Instead, they could become a slow-motion prank from hell. In crowded towns, waste seeped into groundwater. Animals drank from the same sources, and people drew water from places that looked clean enough if you did not think too hard. Which, to be fair, was a popular strategy. Contaminated water meant stomach illness, weakness, and dehydration. And once diarrhea started, the body could crash fast. Modern medicine knows that severe fluid loss can become dangerous in hours. Medieval families did not have oral rehydration salts for fluids or a clinic down the lane. They had prayers, broth, and the grim hope that the patient would stop leaking from both ends before sunset. This is why prevention mattered so much, even when people did not fully understand the mechanism. They knew that bad water made people sick. They knew that crowded streets smelled like death's waiting room. They knew that animals in town were not exactly helping. But knowing and fixing are two very different beasts, and medieval Europe was wrestling one with a butter knife. The road is the problem. Livestock in the road was not a charming rustic detail. It was a public health hazard with hooves. Horses kicked up waste. Pigs rooted through garbage. Chickens scattered filth. Carts churned mud into sludge. Every market day turned the street into a shared contamination zone, and every rainstorm turned that zone into soup. What medieval towns tried: street sweeping, waste removal orders, market regulation, wall protection, burial rules during outbreaks. What they could not reliably do: separate clean water from waste, control animal traffic, enforce sanitation everywhere, understand microbes, stop people from dumping chamber pots wherever they pleased. That gap is the whole story. You can spend all day pretending hygiene is a modern invention, but the Vikings were already running a grim little sanitation operation, while later medieval towns were still acting like a bucket of filth was a civic plan. Welcome to the evidence, where the dirt gets organized. The Coppergate latrines. In York's Coppergate area, archaeologists found latrines that were not random holes in the earth like some cursed afterthought. They were part of a system. Waste was collected, contained, and managed in a way that shows planning, not magic, not germ theory, just plain old systems thinking. You do not need to know about microbes to understand that living next to your own sewage is a terrible lifestyle choice. And then there is the Lloyd's Bank coprolite. Yes, that is a real thing. It is a preserved human stool, and it is basically a time capsule of medieval gut drama. Scientists have used it to study diet, parasites, and daily life. That one lump of ancient poop tells you more truth than 1,000 romantic speeches about the noble past. It says people were eating grains, dealing with intestinal parasites, and living close enough to waste that their bodies kept receipts. This is the part where the modern viewer usually goes, EW. Correct, but also useful. Because evidence like this proves that sanitation was not just about cleanliness as a moral virtue. It was about reducing exposure. Keep waste away from living space, and you lower the odds of turning your home into a disease buffet. Hedeby, the harbor town that knew better. Hedeby was one of the great Viking trading centers, and its archaeology shows a settlement that understood flow. Not just trade flow, but human flow, waste flow, water flow. Harbors mattered because they were reset points. Ships arrived, people unloaded, supplies moved, and the whole place functioned like a living machine instead of a stagnant puddle of bad decisions. That matters because disease loves stillness. Rot loves stillness. Filth loves stillness. A harbor town that keeps moving is not perfect, but it is less likely to become a sealed jar of misery. Hedebe's remains show organized activity, drainage, and infrastructure that suggest people were thinking ahead. Not with microscopes. With experience. With the ancient human skill of noticing that if you let crap pile up, the universe eventually collects interest. Oseberg and Gokstad. The Oseberg and Gokstad ship burials are famous for their craftsmanship, but they also reveal something less glamorous and more important. The Vikings were building with practical intelligence. These ships were not floating luxury spas. They were engineered for use, maintenance, and survival. The same culture that could build a vessel fit for burial could also build routines around washing, grooming, and keeping bodies functional. That is the key. Hygiene was not a purity ritual. It was maintenance. Like sharpening a blade or patching a sail, it was part of staying alive. You do not need germ theory to understand that a filthy body, filthy clothes, and filthy water make life harder. You just need enough brain power to notice that the guy who never washes is also the guy everyone avoids at the fire. And yes, the archaeological record backs this up. Combs, tweezers, ear spoons, soapstone vessels, and bathing-related finds show that personal care was built into daily life. Not as a luxury, as routine.